Hi everyone, apologies for the lateness of the Fabrengen. Hopefully we'll come before Shabbos at least. And we're hoping that we'll be able to Fabreng in person in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, and Beis Hamikdash HaShlishi already before Shabbos. And especially this coming Shabbos. Today is Fabrengen. Firstly, today is Beis Nissan, the yahrzeit of my father, of Imori, and I want to make this Fabrengen Lili Nishmasei to Fol Menachem Nachum Ben Yitzchak Isaac, as well as we're in the Shiva of my father-in-law, and let it be also for the Ili of his Neshama, Ephraim Ben Chaim. And as usual, as a Chassidische Fabrengen can accomplish what Malach Michal can't accomplish, may this Fabrengen bring, especially now that we're in the month of Nisan, Nisei Nisim, may it bring Nisei Nisim, miraculous miracles for every single person and everything that they want and in everything they need, all the brachas, b'teva, nide, v'anigle, imbani, chayu, mezeine, b'chulam, reviche, and everything, all the brachas that are possible, and also for Mordechai Dov Ber HaKoyin Ben Chana to be a refuah shalema. So it's Parshas Tazria, where we talk about the Negat Soras, which is quite an amazing thing. The Rebbe explains to us that the Negat Soras on one hand is the highest thing, and at the same time it is expressed in the lowest. Negat Soras ein lemailo me oineg. There's nothing higher than oineg, pleasure, which especially according to Kabbalah and Chassidus, it shows on the essence of godliness. And ein lemata mi nega, there's nothing lower than a nega. A mitzayra sits badod yeshev michutz lamachni, sits outside of the camp. But that same badod, that same outside of the camp, we're told that Soras Mashiach himself is called a mitzayra devei Rebbe. Mashiach himself is called a mitzayra because the concept of Soras means it's the highest level of the essence of godliness being revealed, but when it's not able to be expressed, it expresses itself in the lowest way. And our job is to connect to the truth of what it is, and in that way reveal, even in the hardship, even in the lowness, even in the darkness of the world, to reveal that essence of godliness, the essence of Holocaust, to reveal Mashiach in the world. Especially now in the month of Nisan, we're taking Nisan Nigalu v'Nisan Asidin Ligal, but we have to bring down that Nisan into the world so it's revealed so that the whole world sees it. As we said, the Fabrengen this week is with a connection to the Rebbe Rashab, as we're coming now from the Ilul of the Rebbe Rashab Beis Nissan. The Rebbe Rashab said, Ich gehe in Himmel, dichsavim lazichayich. The Rebbe Rashab showed us that aspect, that he said, I will be in heaven in the highest possible place, but yet I will still, through your learning my chassidus, and through your following in my teachings, my ways, I'll be connected with you in the physical manner, in the most physical way. And in fact, that's also the idea of Beis Nissan, is the day when the first Para Aduma was brought in the Midbar. The Para Aduma is what purifies the Tumas Meis. Para Aduma is the idea that it can purify even a person who's the lowest possible level, Tumas Meis. And yet, who does it? It's always connected to Moshe Rabbeinu. Every Para Aduma has from Moshe Rabbeinu, bringing the highest of the high into the lowest of the low. And this is something for every one of us. And of course, in order to really get this, let's start with a story. So this story was publicized 10 years ago, but then it was republicized this year, but with an added thing. This year, 3 months ago, Rosh Chodesh Shvat, a Jew in Yerushalayim passed away. His name was Reb Shalom Eliezer Kain. Reb Eliezer Kain. He was a big asken, involved in all kinds of things in Yerushalayim. And a month after he passed away, it was repeated a story which at the time when it was publicized 10 years ago wasn't publicized with his name, because he begged, he didn't want his name to be involved in it. But after he passed away, it was publicized with his name. The one who told the story was Reb Moshe Ornstein, the Rosh Yeshiva in Netanya, Chabad in Netanya. We told him, this Reb Eliezer Kain had told him the story years ago when it happened, and then he publicized 10 years ago, but then this year he told his name. What was the story? This was in the year Tafshin Lamed Ches. And it was Tammuz Tafshin Lamed Ches. And this Reb Eliezer, I guess, used to travel to the United States for various Klal Inyanim, etc. Now, he had a flight from Eretz Yisrael through France. It stopped in France, and he had a stopover. It was a full day stopover. So he had a full day in France. So he went out of the airport, and he started sitting. He took a walk in Paris. He comes to a outdoor cafe, and he's sitting there, and he sees there's a person, a tall person, with broad shoulders and shoulder length hair, long black hair. He looks like a elderly man, and he's speaking, and he's making with his hands, and you can see he's extremely charismatic. There's a bunch of young boys and girls, probably in their 20s. They're listening to him. They're listening to every word he's saying. Some of them are writing down in the notebooks the things he's saying, and he's watching the scene. And he's sitting there, and after the man finishes speaking, the man's walking by, and he turns to him, this person, and he says, "Malik koyain bebeis hakvuras." He says it to him in like a Polish accent. He says, "What's a koyan doing in the Beis HaKvaris?" Basically, what's a frum yid doing in a place like this? And he was shocked. This guy looked like a goy. There was no question. And here he's talking like mamish with this real Chassidish accent. Anyway, so he sat down, and for half an hour they're talking all in Yiddish, in a Polish Yiddish. And finally, after half an hour they're talking, the guy says to this Reb Eliezer, he says to him, "You look like you're not very busy. You look like you have time. Would you like to come with me?" So he says, "Yeah." The most thing that went, Taki didn't have anything to do. He was bored, and at the same time, he was really curious to know more about this guy. So fine, he takes him to one of the very expensive areas of Paris. He takes him to a nice house over there. He takes him in, and he shows him his living room. It's beautiful living room. And then he says to him, "This is the Goyish living room. Come, let me show you the Jewish living room." He's looking at him. He doesn't understand what he's talking about, Goyish, Jewish. And he comes into the next room, and he sees a room with expensive bookshelves. The entire room is lined with bookshelves, and mostly it's Jewish books. There's a Rambam, and there's a Shulchan Aruch. He said he saw over there also Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. There's a Noam Elimelech. There's other Chabad Svarim, Chassidish Svarim, all kinds of Svarim. And the guy turns to him and he says, after talking to you for an hour, for 2 hours, I like you. And he says, he turns to him and he says to Rebbe Eliezer, he says, is it mutual? He says, yeah. He says, I want to ask you, I want to tell you something, and I want to ask you, give me a promise. Give me a tkiyas kaf. I want you to give me a handshake, but give me your word that you will never reveal to anyone what I'm about to tell you. So he gave him the handshake. He said, I won't tell anyone. And he says to him his name. Now, he obviously, when he told the story, he didn't say what the name was. He said his name. The name itself is from a very important Rebbeische family in Poland from before the war. He says he was shocked. He tells him who he is. He was the son of a certain big Rebbe. And he says, this guy, his family, his cousins, his family, all his family, they're all Rebbes in Yerushalayim, Bnei Brak, in different places. And he tells him, I'll tell you my story. It was in the years of the Holocaust that nobody knew where I was. And they still think, nobody still knows even that I'm still alive today. They think that I'm one of the 6 million. He says, but I did survive the Holocaust, but I was broiges at the Eibishter. He says, I believe in the Eibishter, but I'm broiges at him, I'm angry at him. And so I started living my life like a total goy. He says, I keep nothing, not kosher, not Shabbos, not Yom Kippur, zero. And he says, I'm a professor in Greek philosophy in Sorbonne University. Fine. Then he says to him, but I need something from you. I need a favor from you. And I'm ready to pay you in order to do this favor. He says, I have a very important shlichus that I have to give over something to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he says, but I need 2 days to set it up. He felt at that time, this Rebbe Eliezer, that probably it's a will or something. But he doesn't know what, because he never opened. He doesn't know what was in. He gave him a closed envelope. But he told him, I'll pay you to push off your flight 2 days until I'm ready. And I'll give you this envelope. But he says, but I have 2 conditions. The first condition is you're not allowed to open the envelope to see what's inside it. And the second condition, he says, is that you can't give it, you have to give it only to the Rebbe himself. He says, if you're not able to give it in the Rebbe's hand, to the Rebbe himself, don't give it to anyone. He says, I don't want you to give it to any of the mashbakim. And he says to him, I don't want you to give it to Label, I don't want you to give it to Binyamin. He knows the names, he knows everything going on. He says, you have to give it directly to Lubavitcher Rebbe. Otherwise, don't give it. Fine. So he takes the envelope and he waits the 2 days, and they had a few also interesting conversations as over the 2 days. And he travels, he takes his flight to New York. The day after he arrives in New York, he goes to the Maskiros. He had never been in 770 before, he had never been to the Rebbe before. But he went into the Maskiros and he said, I have something that I have to give to the Rebbe. So Maskir says that's impossible. It was Tafshin Lamed Ches. The Rebbe had a heart attack earlier that year. And nobody was able to go into the Rebbe. There were people able for whatever reasons, but in general, stam to go into the Rebbe, there was no such a thing. He said, I just need to give it to the Rebbe, just give the Rebbe the envelope. And they said, V'shum Weifen, and Label started making fun of him. He said, what are you talking? What's your issue? It's an envelope. I don't open the envelope anyway. I give it to the Rebbe anyway. What do you care? What do you need to go into the Rebbe? He says, no, I need to. And he says, it's impossible. He says, Ashad, it's a pity because it's a lost opportunity. And the Label tells him, what are you talking about? Like, what's the big deal? Give it to me. I'll give it to the Rebbe. Anyway, he realizes there's nothing. He can't do anything about it. I mean, he's not going to start pushing. So he went back to wherever he was staying. And he figured, no, it's a shot, but I'm not going to be able to do it. He says the day before he was supposed to go back to Eretz Yisrael, Yud Tes Tammuz. That year, Shiva Asar B'Tammuz was on Shabbos. So Sunday was Chai Tammuz, was Shiva Asar Tammuz Nidche, the fast of Shiva Asar Tammuz. He says, I woke up the morning before I was supposed to get back to Eretz Yisrael. He says, I had like some naive, childish feeling, maybe I should try one more time. So I had no idea. I didn't even know what I'm going to do. I knew Label told me there's nothing happening. He says, I came to 770. And Punkt, he says, the Rebbe was coming out to Mincha. It was actually the first time that the Rebbe came to daven Mincha with the Chassidim in 770 in the main shul on a regular weekday since the heart attack. He says, the Rebbe was coming out to Mincha. So I waited around. After Mincha and Chesatera, etc., all the things. He says the Rebbe is walking out, and I see Labels walking there behind the Rebbe, and Label sees me, and he makes me a sign, don't you dare. Don't you dare. He says, I wasn't even thinking of pushing, but he says, now I was even more scared. So I took 2 steps back, that, I'm not there, just standing here. Anyway, he says, the Rebbe is walking by. Suddenly the Rebbe stops and looks at me. He says, at the beginning, I thought, when I was never by the Rebbe before, I was sure the Rebbe was looking at someone standing next to me. And I realized very quickly the Rebbe is looking at me. The Rebbe says to me, "Nu," and I didn't know what to say. He says, the Rebbe points to my jacket pocket where I had the envelope. And the Rebbe says again, "Nu," and sticks out his hand. He says, I was shocked. But I took out the envelope and I put it in the Rebbe's hand. And the Rebbe said, thank you. And the Rebbe walked out very swiftly. He says, I was shocked out of my mind. He says, I'm standing here. He said, what kind of place did I fall into? People don't even know what's going on over here. I mean, the Rebbe knows that I have something for him and points and whatever. He says, I said, I'm running away from here as fast as I can. This is crazy. Anyway, he says, I called up the guy had given me his number. I called him up. I told him I did his shlichus. I did what he asked. He was very happy. He asked a few questions, what happened, etc. And he was very happy. He says, that was it. I went back to Eretz Yisrael. And he says the next year was Tavshin Yud Tes. Tavshin Lamed Tes. And he said, again, I had to go to America for whatever it was. He says, I came to the Rebbe out of Yom Kippur. I didn't even know what I was coming from, but it turned out that the Rebbe gives out lekach. The Rebbe gives out honey cake on Yom Kippur. So I also stood on the line for lekach. He says the Rebbe gave everybody one piece of lekach. The Rebbe gave me a piece, and the Rebbe gave me a second piece. And he says I understood right away what the Rebbe meant, who it was for. So he says after Tishrei, I call up the number, and I can't find the guy. I'm looking, finding what's happening, and I couldn't find. I knew that the Rebbe gave me a piece of lekach to look for him, but he's not answering his number, etc. So he says, I went to France, and I went around. Sorbonne University is a huge place. I went around, and I'm asking. I knew his name, the name that he goes by. And I'm asking people, I'm asking around, and they send one person to the other, and finally I come to the right place, to someone who knew him. And he says, why are you interested? Why do you need to know? He says, I was his friend. He says, well, I'm sad to tell you, he had passed away. He says, it turns out he had passed away, Simchas Torah. Simchas Torah had passed away. So he said, I asked them, so where was he buried? So they took me. He says, I was shocked. Here, this is the son of a big Rebbe, of a big tzaddik, and he's buried in a Goyish cemetery, mamish, he says, I said, a capital Tilim, whatever it is, and then I went back to Eretz Yisrael, and he says it kept on bothering me. I didn't know what to do. On one hand, I can even go to his family members. I knew who his family is, but he had sworn me to secrecy. I didn't know what to do. He says, at that time, I began to become close to the Amshin of a Rebbe. So I went into the Amshin of a Rebbe, and I told him this story. So when I told him the story, I wanted to tell him the name. The first person in the world I'm going to tell the name. And he says to me, no, don't tell me the name. You promised, don't tell me the name. He says, I told him, what can I do about this? Here he's such a person, and he's in a Goyish cemetery. So the Amshin of a Rebbe says to me, don't worry. the Lubavitcher Rebbe took responsibility for him. He spread his wings on him. He says he'll take care of him. You don't have to worry. You have nothing to worry about. He said, I was happy. I have nothing to worry about. I have nothing to worry about. But he says it came a year later or something, and I was traveling, and I was in Europe in a nearby country, so I figured, let me go try out. I knew now, I didn't need to ask anybody, because I knew already where the cemetery is. I went to the cemetery, and I went to look for that place where they had shown me that this guy is buried. He says, I see the grave's not there. I figured I'm going to go, I'm going to say a capital Tilm, there's for sure nobody that even knows about it. I'll say something, at least I'll say something holy, but it says the grave's not there. And I'm looking around, someone sees the caretaker or whatever, sees I'm looking around, he says, your friend who was buried here, he says, a little while ago, a couple of Jews came and they moved him to a Jewish cemetery. So this is the Maisa. But what's the story, and our time's running up? But the story is that our connection, just like the Rebbe Rashab said, you gain Himmel, Diksavim Lazichayich. The fact is that as people are connected to the Rebbe, just like by the Rebbe Rashab, and for sure how much more so with the Rebbe gives us that strength. The Rebbe takes care of us. Even if a person's in the lowest possible place, and sometimes a person feels like they're in the lowest possible place, our connection is there. We just have to wake up our connection. We have to awaken it and feel what it is, because we're there and we're connected. And that's the idea of, like you said, Paraduma. That's the idea of Parshas Tazria, and that's exactly what it means, reveal Mashiach even in the lowest place. Nega. A person feels sometimes like I'm in that type of state of a nega, badad yeshiv, I'm an oisvarf. I'm michutz lamachana, I don't belong with everybody because of my things, because of my actions, because of my behavior. I'm disconnected. And the Rebbe says the real pnimius of the nega is ein lamayla meyainig. The real pnimius, the real inner essence is that as a Jew, and especially as someone who has a connection to the Rebbe, he lifts me and connects me to the highest place. I just have to reveal that. No. I just have to reveal it and bring it out, and in that way will reveal the Taras HaMitzaira, the Teiras HaMitzaira, the idea of Mashiach, who is also called a Mitzaira, a Chivra Devei Rebbe, will reveal it in the world, that the whole world, even the lowest aspect of the world, will see the Roch Chol Basar Yachtav Kifi Havaya Diber, that will see this galus of Holocaust in the whole world immediately. Mamish. A guten Shabbos.